Todd or I will help repeat that out for everyone to see. Jody is also coming from Stony Brook. And we'll have a section, this panel is primarily devoted to not just giving some information, getting you comfortable with what metrics matter and metrics and data storytelling, but also we'll have plenty of time for open discussion, and we'll be able to unmute your mics. So whatever you can or cannot communicate effectively in chat, we'll have a chance to have people raise their hands and unmic and ask questions or join the discussion. Welcome, Andrea.
Moment, Todd. I believe everyone's coming in unmuted, so we may have to go and.
I can deal with that.
Yeah, some are, but good catch, Karina.
So we don't end up with the background noise.
Competing for all of that. Welcome, Catherine Kelly. So we're 1 minute after start time. I'm going to get us rolling. If you've attended any of these before or arrived early for a behind-the-scenes chit-chat, I am Gail Litwin, and we've got a great VSys Voices panel happening today, but we also are using polls everywhere, and if you haven't used it before in any of our previous last couple of webinars, we're just going to run a little test, and so if you can text the code or scan or visit the poll everywhere website, our very, very important poll question today is, what is your favorite season of the year? And I think this is going to vary because we're across different parts of the country, but please answer the poll of what, in a word cloud, what is your favorite season of the year, and test that poll everywhere works. And we'll have some other poll questions that are directly related to the topics that we are discussing today. If you want to check that out, please do that little test.
Sorry, Dina, I don't think I had that question already set up for poll everywhere.
Oh, I thought we were doing open it. Okay, what questions do you have in the poll everywhere?
Yeah, I didn't have a, I can try to insert a word cloud right now for that question you just asked. We didn't have kind of like a welcome one.
I thought we were open source test. Oh, that's okay. We're going to make sure people have, if you haven't used poll everywhere before, you can get it set up for other questions as well. And it's worked pretty well as a tool previously. So Todd will have folks will mute you as you come in, and as we get rolling, and Karina and Joan and I present some of the basic information around data storytelling, then we'll have chance for open discussion and folks to unmute and participate. And hopefully we'll get some of the bugs worked out in chat, but Todd will help cover the chat as people have questions going on there as well. So
what did you say, favorite season of the year? Is that what you said?
Favorite season of the year.
Oh, hi, Crystal. It's Amy. Are you in the gift shop today, this afternoon?
No, I'm in my office.
Oh, okay, because I'm in another training. I didn't know if you wanted to listen to it or not.
Yeah, there's one thing.
Okay. All right. Yep.
Bye.
And you can also try to, either to panelists or hosts, you can put answers in the chat, such as it works for you. And Cheryl's asking how to poll everywhere on computer, not phone. You should see the website as for 123 to visit poll everywhere, and you can put that into or text it on the code. But yeah, for a computer and not a phone, should be able to visit the website as well. But this is one of the tools in our toolbox. If it's helpful for you to use that and answer that way, that's fine. If not, you can also answer as we go through discussion questions into the just open discussion unmuting panel.
Karina, I'm still not seeing the poll everywhere sessions being active.
Because we haven't started an official one yet. I was trying to insert the question that
Cheryl.
Yeah. I was asking right now, so I'm going to try.
And Karina has just put the link into the chat room for folks to test out.
I believe, let me refresh. Okay, here we go. We do have a question active. I can't Don't know how to show it in my presentation at the moment, but it is active.
Okay. That's where we just want to get that. And we want to make sure that we have time to get to what we need to get to. So, Todd, again, it's just for the sake of, we have lots of folks today and we don't want to have too much background as Todd is meeting you, but you will have a chance to talk. So, Karina, let's get into our intros and roll right into a real poll question to take the temperature today. So we're happy to have Karina Vargas and Jim Cardellino, and Todd is going to monitor the chat for us on how to do these metrics that matter. And there's our question.
This is where I see that what is going on here. Next slide here.
There we go.
It's jumping.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool.
It was supposed to give us the introduction slide, but
That's all right.
Okay.
You're fine.
We're moving right along. So this should work, and you can go to respond at pollev.com, VSys Voices 304 if you're on a computer and not a mobile device. And really, just checking with folks like easier, we've been talking about data today and data storytelling and management and metrics. Finding out how much of your data is digital and how much is still on paper records. And I know that can vary sector by sector, and we tend to have a pretty strong representation from hospitals and healthcare for VSys One clients and in these. And we're getting that for the most part so far, and we'll give you more time to respond. Most people are dealing with digital records, so that's helpful because those are often easier to manage for this kind of data storytelling that we're talking about. And still a certain percentage of paper records as well, but over 80% are answering that we have primarily digital records. So that's good and useful information to have. Karina, do you want to kick off with how we can use the digital and other data?
Okay. Yes, except I'm not sure what is happening where it's jumping slides. It's not allowing me to show. I want to show this slide. There we go.
Hey, there it is. You talked them into
Great.
All right.
She's got this.
Yep.
So, just some objectives for today. We just wanted to just show how metrics are related to some of our webinar content from the past and what we have cooked up for you for the future. Also discussing some basics behind metrics and how we can use that in the nonprofit sector. And then some essential components to creating a data story. So that's what we're going to be discussing today.
Excellent.
And
Joan, if you want to talk about how metrics connect to the big picture, and some of the webinars we've had in the last few months as well, just as a nice overview for folks.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. I see a lot of familiar faces on today's call. So many of you have attended our previous sessions, and if you have, or even if you haven't, if you viewed the videos, the topic of metrics is not new for us. And it connects the bigger picture that we've been sharing through our monthly webinars. I'm a metrics geek, by the way. Today's topic on metrics, today's topic on metrics connects meticulously with our previous topics, like social determinants of health, HCAPS, recruitment, interviewing, and stakeholder management, and managing up. So metrics it really drives the planning and evaluation of ideas within your programs, and in parentheses, unscripted. Generally speaking, the volunteer management sector, with the two sides to our version, one is empathetic, one is analytic. We are empaths. We are not analysts. So this is a tough topic for us. We're great with the pictures of the dogs, the picture when it comes to the analyst side of our brain, it really has to take an equal footing now. So it really drives planning and evaluation of the ideas within your program and proves the value of your volunteers within your organization. And as we look forward at our planned webinar topics going forward, metrics will continue to link our past and future discussions because we want volunteer services solid, LinkedIn, one of the blocks on the metrics picture, the storytelling picture of your organization as a whole. This is unscripted too, but I want us to guard against, as we look at today's session, against the stories we tell each other in the sector. There's lots of them. But I want you to focus on the stories you're telling within your organization and your external audiences to your organization. So that's where, in my mind, this metric storytelling needs to take place.
I think so too, Jen, and that's a really great point. And as we go to Karina, you had brought up the baking a cake metaphor, which I think is really appropriate. And we're really looking at ingredients that you need to build a narrative data story. And just like baking a cake, it's important to know that, one, no two cakes are alike. So similarly, your data story is going to be uniquely yours. So we're giving you some examples and a lot of tools to use and ideas to understand that this is your cake to bake with your data and the story that you want to tell. Giving you the ingredients doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the baker of all the cakes. Many organizations, probably most of them that are here today, have dedicated departments and staff that create data stories with metrics from different departments. So if you don't already know who those folks are, find out and build up that relationship and that rapport with them, because knowing what ingredients are needed in a data narrative story can help you facilitate the right information for the right kind of data-informed story that you are telling. So you don't have to be the baker all the time, but you need to understand the basics of how the cake goes together. And finally, in the cake metaphor, just making me very hungry, by the way. Thanks, Kelly, for that. Baking takes practice, and data stories and crafting a narrative storytelling does as well. And although we may cover some foundational information in the hour we have together today, practice makes you better at it, and practice makes perfect. And you have a lot of wisdom in the room that we'll hear from your colleagues, not just the panel today, on how to get practice with that. And again, reach out to the professionals within your organization, either as staff, and there also may be volunteers where this is their day-to-day job, is being data analysts. And so understanding who has the talent to help with this or to even take on a project within your organization is going to be an important part of the recipe today. Karina, over to you.
Yeah. So I just wanted to talk about some basic terminology when it comes to metrics, and actually I'll preface it by saying there are some synonyms out there too. But I want to use the terms data, information, and knowledge, and just share some basics about this. So data is the raw facts that we collect through some of our systems and processes. It could be something that you're capturing in a spreadsheet or a database or some kind of application. It could be someone's name. It could be the date that they first started with your program, the number of hours in the shift that they had last week, or even a picture. Not all data is necessarily manipulative, like you can't necessarily work with it, but it is nonetheless data, like someone's picture. But what we do is then use this data and we analyze it, we process it, and it turns into information. So we put it into context for us, and that's what allows us to make some data-driven decisions when we're able to correlate the data that I have. Let's say I have a collection of dates, and I correlate that with maybe a collection of names. Now I put those into context, and I start to correlate, say, oh, these are the number of these are the dates of the shifts this week and the volunteers' names for this week. So now I have some information. And then that turns into knowledge. Knowledge is that aha moment that insight that you get when you've gathered data, converted it into some kind of information, and it's been reported and communicated to you. So for example, if someone said, here is the gift shop coverage for this week, you get 3 dates and 3 volunteer names, you're thinking, I have my aha moment, I got to do something, I have to make a decision. And that's a very simple example, but that's basically how our brain processes data, information, and knowledge. And so when you have knowledge, sometimes it drives you to have to ask more questions, like who else is available this week that can help cover that shift? Or it might, and which then starts the cycle again of data capturing, collecting, correlating, and reporting it back over again. And that's pretty much the process that we'll go through now. I mentioned that there are some synonyms. So you might hear metrics, you might hear analytics, some other words that you might be used to hearing. And so this data helps us with operations, so the day-to-day things that we do, like I gave you my simple example. But that can also, it's also what drives the strategic planning, which Joan has referred to in many times in our previous webinars, as she mentioned in the previous slide. It's what really gets us in the bigger picture on that the data story board that your organization is sharing.
I wanted to add one thing to this, and we didn't refer to the 25 or 20% of folks in the beginning that said that their data is in paper format. So we're talking digital data, and we won't have time here today unless you have suggestions about how to convert that paper into digital. But the point being, we're talking digital data today,
right?
Not paper. We've got a fair amount of people that are still at paper. Totally different issue, something we can maybe address later on.
Yeah, and Kristen had mentioned in the chat, thank you, Todd, for cutting and pasting that for all to see, that there, and probably a lot of other organizations in the session today, they're in the process of transitioning to digital. And, some client surveys and things are still on paper, and that's something that we can circle back to. Certainly, I have a lot of examples of how I've had volunteers help solve for that and scan things as we get into the discussion. So we'll, as I say, put a pin in it and circle back. So, Karina's keep on going and show us one of your favorite models for getting this done.
Definitely. But yeah, thank you for that clarification, Joan, because we are speaking about digital data storytelling, because that's really what's going to help us analyze the data quickly and to be able to go into what we have for today, which is data storytelling. With data storytelling, what we want to do is focus on the insight. The knowledge, from that previous slide, the knowledge that we've gained, that we've obtained, that's what we really want to focus on, not the information alone. And what I mean by that is many times I've seen, and Dana and Joan and Todd, I'm sure you can attest to this, that we'll see reports of people saying, we had 100 volunteers. That's great. In comparison to what, or from what time frame, so there's not the knowledge behind it. Maybe, what aha moment we had. And so many times we're thinking we're reporting metrics and data stories, but we're really just pasting information. We want to really move away from that and just filling out a report with hours and numbers of people, really move into sharing some more details. And so one way to do that is through data storytelling. And I have on screen here an example, something called Freytag's Pyramid of Data Storytelling, where you start providing so this narrative will have some background information, and then you start sharing some of the supporting facts, what led up to that information capturing it, or what was the action, the process of working with that data, and then your main insight. What did you learn? What is that knowledge that you captured? And that's your aha moment. And then what are some of the conclusions that you've had since then? And so those are the basic elements of data storytelling. So, for example, instead of just saying we had 100 volunteers in last year, it could be we had 100 volunteers since with the start of the pandemic, I know a lot of the programs really had to put pause, but you can, instead of saying we had 100 volunteers, is what did those 100 volunteers get to do? What did those volunteers, what was the impact of those volunteers, and sharing more of that, the insight that you had. And so, I'm sorry, I wanted to talk about the exposition that we have here is the setting or that background. Like I mentioned, your characters. One of the characters that should be in here, and I'll say characters in air quotes, would be maybe your goals. Yeah. That is that goal is a main character in your storytelling, and so that might be kind of where you start off. We had this goal of measuring this, or we set our goals to focus on this, maybe social determinants of health, or growing our program. What was that goal? The rising insight might be the plot of events leading to that climax, so maybe revealing some deeper insight. What was the problem, or what was that opportunity that you saw your department solving? And again, the climax being that most important story, that moment, that aha moment that you realized. And in the resolution, again, where did we resolve that problem? Where did we resolve that conflict, or where did we seize that opportunity? And then the conclusion would be, now what are you going to do? What are some next steps? Are you going to grow, continue, or start over, or what is it that you're going to do moving forward? And so when you're telling stories like that, think of first who your audience is. So not all data stories are meant for all people. So think of, is this a data story that I want to share for our volunteers and just share how wonderful things are and share it with them directly? Or is this something that you're preparing for an executive leader or a community member? So think of those things when you're writing a story in the same way like a storyteller would use different language if they're writing a children's story versus maybe a more academic piece of work. And so think of your audience when you're doing that. And when you're presenting your metrics, again, you can share your data, these stories, almost like episodes as well. And so you might be thinking, okay, what is it that I'm going to share? Lay out, think of the story you're going to tell as a big picture. Think of your favorite TV series that you have. They share with you little stories every episode, but yet they're still connected. And so think of what is your overall picture that you want to share about your volunteer program, again, thinking about your audience. And then just these little data stories are almost like episodes, short stories that you're revealing the overall picture of your program. And so things to think about when you're thinking of the elements of a data story.
And there's something I think that I can share before you get into an example, Karina. It's called a story spine. So if you do any narration at all as a writer or a performer, there's every day the world has been like this, and then this happened, and then this happened, and because those things happened, now the world is this way. And that's a very basic 3 or 4 point story structure or story spine that I think can help. To Joan's point, that very often we come into this profession and we are more emotive or narrative or storytelling and emotionally connected relationship-based people. And so speaking the language of the audience into analytics, it can sometimes help to translate our own thoughts into our comfortable learning style or a story spine or a simple structure, and then realize this is how we might translate it to the jargon of who we're trying to persuade.
Exactly. Good point. And just to give an example of what could be, not the slide I wanted to.
Not skipping to the question yet, I know.
And it's doing it again. I can see where Lisa had this issue before, where I'm clicking on the next slide and it's jumping to that storyboard. I don't know what is happening here.
Okay, playing with it. Click force. We'll find that happy spot.
Sweet spot there. Yeah, it's hiding on me. Let me.
You're so excited about asking questions.
It is. It's not wanting to. Hold on. They're all disabled at the moment. I'm not.
VSys working through that. I put the question up about whether or not any of you guys have some good examples of data stories, and that are effective, ones that have actually generated results, whether that's improved metrics, that you achieve your goals, whether that's better recruiting, whether it's better management. Let me know. Let us know so that we can highlight that for us. We're going to be opening the mic in a bit.
Yeah, let's go ahead and answer this question because it's determined to display for us, and maybe after the responses come in, I can jump into the next example if that's okay, Dana.
Yeah, of course. And again, there's a lot of different ways to bake the cake. It depends on what flavor and who you're going to serve it to, I think is a good way to think about it. And this helps us know who's in the room and what you need this data, what story you need it to tell in your organization, and volunteer impact to be expected, the majority with the audience we have today, but also recognition, and particularly because healthcare is very heavily represented in our participants, patient experience is important, quality improvement, and those both tie into Joan's earlier points about metrics and part of HCAP surveys and social determinants of health and the previous lessons we've had, tying all of this together, how metrics matter. And the fundraising, it seems like fundraising is always on floating in the outer orbit a little bit. How can this translate to funding and resourcing? But it's interesting to see that, there is some effort towards also workforce development or talent development. And fundraising is catching up fast. Once you mention money, everybody jumps on the answer there. So I think this is really helpful. And Karina, I think this speaks to, if we can get to the example, how that's translated.
Yeah, because I can definitely see either any of these being great overall stories, right? So like the volunteer impact, and then these little episodes are these stories that we're sharing. So let me see if it will now allow me to
tell your story.
While you're looking, in terms of your volunteer storybooks and storyboards, all of you, this is, I'm sure, just basic management techniques, but just like you don't do your taxes in one day, you're always collecting into files, into folders, storyboard information, and these could be files, they could be manual, they could be digital, but using the characteristics on the left-hand column that we just, created quickly, what's important to your organization, and as soon as you see a link and a story that comes across your desk every day, save it for your storyboard.
Yep, absolutely. And Michelle Lynch had a great comment in chat, and I'm just saying it out loud because not everyone can see all aspects of the chat, but she tracked the number of interactions where volunteers had for wayfinding since 2016, and that helped to track the impact, but also how to schedule shifts and volunteer staffing required, and looking to do a lot more with metrics. So again, we always come back to some foundational things like a needs analysis and plan, do, check, act. And this is another great example of, this is information that once you have it, you realize how valuable it is and how much it's going to ripple through to other data-informed decision-making and resourcing and understanding, this does all fit together.
Tailored to your organization. Some of you are from more targeted organizations, and there may be stories that aren't on here that are specific that your organization needs from you or that justifies your position within the organization, and that's the first step to thinking things through.
And if this is
not wanting to work with me, I'm so sorry. We'll have to think about that.
That's okay. Well, what we can do is I can, we had it for a second there.
Yeah, and it goes away. That I see it and then it flies away. But we wanted to share just a simple example of kind of what a data story might be. Yeah. And so I think I'm just so frazzled with the technology right now I can't even speak. And so what I'm going to try to do, and like Dana says, don't look at the wizard behind the curtain or the man behind the curtain. What do you?
Yes, the wizard behind the frantically. Okay. There we go. We got it.
Yep. Okay. It has to come back in. All right. Yep. So here's a very simple example of a data story. So, and this is how I might write it in some kind of report. So I'm going to read it out. So summertime means beach days, ice cream, and sleeping in for our kids. And this is me speaking. In order to meet our goal of making summer 2021 more memorable, we planned 2 activities in June and August. We also asked our kids to rate their summertime experience. And so I have a meaningful graph related to this, right? It was discovered that a sudden drop in rating occurred in September. And when compared to major events, we found a strong correlation between ratings and summertime events. For 2022, we will have higher rated activities early in the summer, leading into then returning to school. We will also aim to increase ratings for less popular events, like back to school, by taking them shopping for clothes and school supplies. So just kind of nitpicking at this story, I started off with my exposition, right? So I set it up. I'm telling you about our summertime. And then the actions leading into that. So we wanted our goal, our character here, we wanted to have this goal of making it something memorable. And so what we did and how we captured. Now I didn't go and talk about the report itself. We used, this system and this rating. I just kind of gave some very simple, again, paying attention to your audience, some very simple setup of how we captured information. And then my aha moment. So this is what we discovered. We had this comparison, and that it led us to more investigation that we then compared it to the major events. And so what we plan to do from there, how we resolved it for this year or what we're planning to do moving forward is, my data story. So it's a very simple example.
And I think a useful way to have a universal data story is I always like to reinforce that there should be a short little message like an elevator pitch that everybody knows that are the basics of the agency or how to support or volunteer or be a donor, but taking this metric storytelling into metrics messaging, I think is possible. So I don't know if we can jump to metrics messaging just real quick, and then we'll open up for discussion, because I think this helps set the stage that, if every single person in your agency who could possibly interact with the community, which is everybody, has just a quick 30-second mission, doesn't have to be the mission statement by quote, but hey, this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is how you can support our work, by donations, by advocating, by sharing social media or links, by volunteering. If everyone has that quick elevator pitch messaging, that's really useful. And then when you get great stories or really interesting results or revelations from metrics and data storytelling, then add a layer. It can be a one-page thing. It can be an email that's sent to everyone. It could be a quick training, so that there can be maybe a 3-minute conversation, especially if something public has happened with your agency that people will have questions about, or you want to publish or promote a new research study or a really interesting positive result after, years of pandemic bad news. When you want to really share something, get that data storytelling narrative into a little short highlighted version that everybody can share. And I think that's part of really taking the output, which is the what, and the exact product, services, profits, revenues, information, the raw information, there's an output of results, and turning it into outcomes which create meanings, relationships, context, and that really turns into the why. So if you think about outputs are the what, and outcomes in the data storytelling is the why, that's when you get that balance, and then teaching some of that messaging in really short, easy to say and digest one-pagers or quick notes to everybody is extremely helpful. And I want to hear from everybody else in the room and get to our open discussion and see what are some examples of metrics. And we're starting to get some answers in the chat, and Todd can help share that with everybody to see. But what examples of metrics are you sharing within your organization is one of the discussion points. And then also, what questions do you have for any of our VSys voices regarding metrics and data storytelling? For Karina, for Joan in particular, as the two deep experts on this, for me or for Todd. And Todd might be able to help in how this applies directly to the VSys One software you're using as well. How do we turn these into action items within the technology that we're using?
Yeah, I'd be happy to help. Marie and Michelle have been having a good little conversation here on chat. If people notice, the question was asked by Marie, how do you document patient encounters with wayfinders? And that's a really interesting question, in my opinion. It's not just a basic one, because our wayfinders are so common inside of all of our operations, but they do have an impact on patient experience. And I like, Marie, what you said in response, that you are tracking not the quantity but the quality of the interactions. And if you'd like, Marie, I can unmute you and let you talk a little bit more about that. What is the process that you went through? What are the questions that perhaps were asked that helped you get to that quality stuff? That speaks to what Dana was saying about the why. Can I unmute you? I just did, Marie.
Go ahead, Marie, if you're comfortable.
I'm sorry. Marie was one of the questions. Did I go through?
Or Michelle was answering as well, so you could try.
Okay, well, I'm working on that. It might take me a second here.
Okay.
All right. Okay, Michelle and Marie, you're unmuted.
Oh, okay. This is Michelle speaking.
Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So, sorry, now I missed the question you asked me.
Well, what was, were you the one with the example of the quality versus quantity questions? Or is that Marie?
Yeah.
Yes. Because what we wanted to do with the volunteers that are wayfinding, they're obviously out, throughout the hospital, and it's difficult to track what kind of impact they have on the patient's experience, but also how many. So it's important to know how many, but it's not necessarily the only number that we wanted to track, and we wanted to ensure that volunteers were spending the quality time that each visitor needed, so that it wasn't just about a number, but it was also about the time that they spent. So that was something that we tracked initially with clickers, and volunteers were coached and trained on ensuring that they spent the amount of time that they needed to with any individual, and then they tracked that number, and at the end of each shift they provided that number. So consistently, week over week, day over day, and then eventually year over year, we were able to see sort of the days and shift times that were the busiest and sort of match the number of volunteers that needed to correspond to that. So we tested out the evening shift and realized that that wasn't really a popular time, but the numbers actually proved that it wasn't, so I don't have staffing at that time as an example.
And Joan, I know you can speak to how having that data back up your anecdotal evidence really strengthens the case. So if we're talking about making a case to get resources or to make changes that you may have to persuade others in the organization to help make. Can you speak to that? Oh, Joan, you might have to unmute yourself.
Right. I tell the story all the time. Many of you have heard me say, I used to report to the director of HR, and I'll never forget it, and I'd use this lesson to this day, and he was a supporter of volunteer services. So I was in his office one day, and I was telling him how wonderful we were, and here's our annual report, and I slipped it across the table, and he slipped it right back to me and said, show me the numbers. So this is an issue that's been going way back. The problem with that exchange was there was no directive to me about what numbers were important to the organization, what they wanted to see, and a format for collecting the information. So they're our biggest challenges. And metrics and data analytics was not in my job description. So these are some of the realities of our world and your world today, and I recognize all of them. And hopefully we're giving you some, if anything, in today's session, some words to use to go back and pose these questions. And then also, the other thing that is really intriguing to me is I would love to hear from you in this chat about how many of you are actually being asked for analytics and data from your organizations. Or is this just something we know we want to do, we should do, it's coming down the pipe, we're not feeling really pressured by it, we just want to make sure we're doing a good job. There's that scenario, but then there's also this scenario of you being mandated by your organization to produce data and feed it into the enterprise system. I'd rather have that scenario, by the way. It's a lot more robust because it shows that we are cemented into the organization. Our data is feeding the enterprise wheel. That's the optimum situation and where we want to be. So if there's anybody in the chat that could answer the question, what data is being requested of you versus what are you offering? I'd be interested to do that.
I think that'd be really insightful, and you can type into the chat. Todd will help cut and paste if it doesn't go to all panelists. So you can also raise your hand, and Todd, our wizard behind the curtain, can unmute you to participate in that. But I think there's that balance between it's nice proactively when you're asked for specific data and metrics and things that you're already measuring. And there also can be, to your point, Joan, and Karina's earlier, that deer in the headlights moment where what am I being asked for and I don't understand this and I don't know what to give them from all of the information I have. So hopefully today this what story you're crafting and what you're being asked, or if you're not being asked, you can start to anticipate what's going to be useful to getting that persuasive story, that data-driven narrative showing.
Yeah, and to add to that, if they're not giving you anything specific, they're not really giving you that guidance, then you're being creative and finding those stories. Like I love, Michelle, what you were sharing about how you were able to make a data-driven decision and, taking an opportunity to write that up as a data story. How we had volunteers in this area and we wanted to maybe increase volunteer engagement or make best use of our resources, of our volunteers, and so upon examining the data and the number of encounters, we've opted to eliminate the evening position for the next year or going forward because it wasn't the best use of our volunteers, but maybe we're able to put them in this other position in the evenings instead. Something like that would be a great data story to talk about how you effectively manage the resources that you have available to you.
That's a great point. So I don't know if we can unmute Marie in the chat that we are only asked for numbers but produce an annual report that contains data stories, and that's part of what we're speaking to today. Is sometimes what you're asked for might be different than what you think really needs to be told and shared and backed up. So if Marie Howell...
Marie is unmuted, yeah.
Great, go ahead.
I'm only ever asked for how many volunteers, what was the monetary value, how many hours and all that, that stuff. So that's what I give them, but then in our annual report, I take that and help everybody understand what that means. So yeah, there were, 25,000 hours in our baby bookworms readers, and that meant that they read, 500 books, gave away 500 books, and spent so much time reading one-on-one to children in the hopes that, that'll give them a little language nutrition and make them more successful as they enter school years and things like that. So, it's not just the numbers, which is very frustrating, but at least I have that option once a year to get that out there, and hopefully eventually somebody will just stop asking for the numbers, or I can get people to understand that it's not just about the numbers.
For me, it almost sounds like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it almost sounds like when you take those 30-second blurbs or where we talked about it, we need to socialize them internally. Like if you go around to your marketing department and say, by the way, did you know that our volunteers are achieving this? And they might go, oh, wow, we really need that. So they don't even know we have it. Right? So,
there are also business analysts and data analysts who are experts. We don't encounter them in our world often. They're experts in translating what you just described, Marie, into data. That's what they do, and then they attach mathematical and formulas to it. So there are people that can help us. We need to find them, and they're in your organization. They're doing that for other departments. They're just not doing it for you. So seek them out. Seek out the data analysts and the business analysts. I don't know where they are, whether they're in your IT department or in your finance department. And the other thing I have to say about the numbers, and from what you're saying in the chat about finance, look, we're still line 6 on the 990. So every charitable organization has to fill out a not-for-profit, I should say, has to fill out a Form 990, line 6 asks for the numbers of volunteers. So that's why finance is still asking us for those numbers. But that should not be what defines us in your organization. It makes us vulnerable. It makes us so vulnerable because that number does not prove that we have fingers and have raised the quality of care within the organization. And that's what we need to do, is find that data, find the words for it, share it, and make it not only part of our organization, but standards that we within the profession hold ourselves to. We've held ourselves to an annual report data with the static data for a long time. And believe it or not, I was around when we thought that was like unbelievably progressive, you know.
That's cutting edge, yeah.
It was cutting edge.
Yeah.
And we would have the guts to put numbers to what we did. But now we're in a new world, and we've got to study it. And we're just on the very outer edge with this section about what we should be and could be doing with metrics and data analytics.
And again, there are expert data analytic bakers probably within your organization and very possibly unofficially within your volunteer talent pool. And you don't have to be the expert on everything, but this gives you enough to understand when it's absolutely necessary to get your resources and to be noticed and to be understood and valued and respected, to expand on the story opportunities you have and seize any opportunity to create a data narrative as much as possible. And I know Marie Cheryl was going through the same thing, and I want to see if first, Kirsten Frey-Herman can be unmuted and talk about outcomes around grant proposals, and then maybe hear from Patty about how they're sharing their numbers. So, Kirsten, if you're okay, and if Todd can unmute you, if you're okay sharing.
Yeah, Kirsten's unmuted. I want to make sure that we get back to Michelle Lynch's favorite last question here that I just posted up to after that. So.
Yes, yeah, we have time for everybody.
Okay. Yeah, Kirsten and Patty are both unmuted.
Okay. So this is Kirsten. Nice to see everybody. We operate similar to a volunteer center, so we have connections with lots of different agencies that we send volunteers to. But almost all of our grants, we have to have like outcome data written into those grants.
Yep.
So, it's anything from, they're not really concerned too much about like number of volunteers or number of volunteer hours. It's more of the impact on the client that they're serving. So we have to end up doing a lot of surveys or try to get survey data from the client. So like for our food distribution, right, the people who are getting the food, we are trying to get data to see what kind of impact having the food is making on them. Not only are they more food secure, are they eating more produce? Are they, trying new foods, those different types of things? And then we also do data collection for our Meals on Wheels clients to be sure that the meals that they are getting are allowing them that they're feeling more socially connected because of the meal delivery, as well as is it allowing them to remain independent in their home versus having to go into a facility. And then we also do data collection of the students that are volunteer students.
Exactly, and I think that's a great example. And Karina, if you want to speak to all those aspects, all those subtleties being communicated.
Exactly. I do remember my time in creating these grants and preparing that. And you don't want to, if you're the one creating those metrics for yourself, bite off more than we can chew. With anything that you are intending to report on, especially with the impact, making sure you are creating something that is measurable, right? And so, for example, if your goal is to, track the pounds of food, do you have a way to measure the pounds of food being distributed, or, what percentage of the food distributed is proteins versus veggies, fresh fruits and vegetables, that there's a way to quantify that and then capture it, record it in some way. And so, because I'm sure they would take an anecdotal, story about, this person and their situation, but I know that they're interested in the larger impact of the organization. But thinking about what the data story, so we talked about this baking a cake, thinking how many sprinkles, is it chocolate chips, is it, what kind of buttercream do you want? Thinking of that in the long run, and then do you have the skill set or the ability to do all that? Say, no, I have a very small oven, I don't have all those items. Okay, maybe simplifying it and giving them maybe more just a vanilla cake with no frosting, one of those naked cakes maybe. Just so thinking about what your picture is at the very end, that story you're going to tell, so that you know how to phrase that goal that you have, make sure it's measurable for yourself. I mean, I know that people talk about SMART goals all the time, and I don't want to diverge into that, but that is really important because if it's measurable, it's attainable, you can hold yourself accountable to that so that you can report on that later on in your data story.
And and I want to go get to Patty as well. But Joan, maybe you and I are having a psychic moment about how we can also share these narrative stories with like county health officials for 5x5, and there's other like public health things that we could tie our metrics into as well. Go ahead, Joan, and then we'll get Patty to comment.
Well, in my world, all that messaging really doesn't come out of the volunteer department. It comes out of marketing and PR. So that's why internally we've had other sessions on the importance of partnerships within your organization. So they would be the ones to go to community health. That's in my world. But the other thing I wanted to say is we don't have the skills that we need in our sector, the volunteer management sector, to do. We have storytelling skills, and we can learn them easily. We don't have data analytics skills. So we haven't put in the resources some educational or training opportunities. You can look at them.
We'll get to that, yeah.
Go get yourself a certificate, because when you do that, you are taught how to translate the stories into data.
Yeah.
In the meantime, go find interns. And we all use interns. We usually use them for marketing or whatever, but go find business or data analysts or interns at your local community college or colleges, and they'll help you get started. They'll take you to the first level. They've got the most current knowledge. They know how to use the tech. And until we can bring the sector and our knowledge up to snuff, let's use the interns to get us where we need to be today.
Exactly. And Patty, finally, before Patty talks, your example of you share a narrative and they're like, we want more data in your narrative. Can you want to speak to that real quick? Oh, Patty, there she goes, unmuted again. Oh, Patty?
Nope. Yep, there she is.
Okay.
Yep,
I provide narratives, and either I get told, we just want the numbers, and then they started coming back of, could you break it down into SBAR bullet points? We just don't have time, and I feel like we just keep getting pushed even farther to the bottom of the agenda of importance, and it gets frustrating in that I'm working with individuals who don't know volunteer services. So how do you educate them to understand volunteer services when they just want numbers? And how can we tell our story better?
Well, fortunately, we've got other webinars on topics like that on the VSys Voices page for resources, which we'll share. But that's part of it. And again, all of these pieces, not just our webinars, but all these ideas we talk about, it's really, you're putting a quilt together that's helping to educate up the decision chain and help them understand your position. But we've definitely got past webinars on that. And I do want to circle back to Michelle's point about how do you get from paper to digitizing, and Joan said interns for different skills. I've had volunteers do data entry. I've had volunteers digitally scan documents into PDFs or a different readable file format, and that's a project. Someone might put their headphones in, and they just love to do stuff like that and get kind of zen or meditative about it, and so you don't have to be the baker that bakes all the stuff and is the expert that does everything. Delegate to people who love to do those kinds of tasks and make it a special project. Go ahead, Christina.
And on that note, keep in mind you're asking two different things.
Right.
It's historical data, things that you already have sitting in your office, and then moving forwards. And so those require two different plans, and so just be well aware of that moving, and that you document. From this point on, we've captured it this way, and then so set yourself up for capturing it in the future. But then what are you going to do with the data that you have already historically captured, and how you're going to translate that into? Is it the scanning? Is it transcribing? If it's a document that has, like, let's say a TV update, all I need is the date. Then I just enter the date, and I don't have to work with the attachment scanning. So thinking about your different documents, I know that I've done that in the past, but I also want to just mention with Patty, you're talking about when they're sharing a narrative, they don't want the narrative. Maybe think of in the story, instead of writing a children's book that's 5 pages long, they just want to just give me the moral of the story. And so maybe just drilling it down to very, very, very short narratives. And then you can, I've seen some reports that will, some data stories that will say kind of an appendix of where they can go to the next page or, at the back of the report, and it has those numbers that that they want. Here is just the data, and then referencing. So, I don't think that it's one or the other.
Yeah. And Michelle has a great point in chat, specifically answering Patty, but this is useful for everybody, that data visualization, GIS, Geographic Information Systems, 3D modeling, statistical modeling, all of that are absolute subsectors of what we're talking about today, and there are deep, deep talent pools of experts who, again, as volunteers or interns, would love to get more time on their resume or just more experience practicing after a class or a certification or graduation on an infographic is another way of saying data visualization. And again, knowing your audience's learning style. And I want to make sure we show some of the resources that we're talking about. So Karina, if you want to, we'll close out the open discussion. You can still put stuff in chat, but I want to show you some resources. And then we want to ask you a couple more questions about how much we want to dive into this. So here are some articles where you can get a little bit more information on this, and these are just things you can look up and see articles and videos. And this is all going to be posted on our VSys Voices resource page in the next week or so. And then these are some paid events where you can choose. The Stanford, I think the 2-day workshop is like $170, and they're 2 90-minute workshops. The Alive Hybrid Conference has about, I think, 4 or 5 different experts, and that's in October, and that's a sliding scale. It can be as little as $10 for an individual or $100 for a large team of you participating virtually. And then the Northwestern Kellogg has a virtual training session much later, getting into next year. So it's really, there's a lot of these resources here. These are kind of the top 3 that we think really support what we're talking about today. If you want to Joan's point, get some sort of certification, take a deeper dive for your own knowledge, or you're just curious and this is interesting to you as well. And Marie's asking us to pop back to the first slide for the articles real quick. If we can go, let's just go backwards. So Forbes, data selling, Power of the Image of Video from the Vision Project, datakind.org is just a great one-stop shopping for this type of thing, and trueimpact.com is another good kind of social impact measurement platform if you're looking for more ideas or more models on how to make this work. And again, we'll have these links up on the VSys Voices site. I want to get to just a couple of questions asking from you. Where do you want us to dive deeper in May or future webinars for you? So we'll dust off our Poll Everywhere skills and see if big data analysis, knowing more about that, integrating metrics and data experience. So if you want to give us some of the answers here, we got a couple leads up front using VSys itself for metrics, tips, tricks, and how-tos. And again, Todd and Melissa on the VSys team would be really great at that. And
Melissa's actually already planning on addressing that next month. How to use VSys.
I'm glad you confirmed that, Todd, because that's what's floating in my mind. But yeah, Melissa's going to speak to that, so that's good that the curiosity is there. And again, to Joan and Karina's expertise, integrating the metrics into the patient experience, since the majority, not all, but majority of our participants are often in the healthcare factor. So I think this is really helpful. And to kind of wrap up today, we can put this in the chat. We have a little follow-up survey. You can do it now, you can do it later, but we'll put that link in the chat. Karina, do you have that link, or do you want me to grab it?
It's up there.
Todd's got it. Great. And that's just a little follow-up survey. Should take, just 5 minutes, maybe 10 if you're sipping a nice, warm, caffeinated beverage and really digging into the questions. This all helps us help you. So we're very interactive VSys Voices team. We want to hear from you, and you're also welcome to contact us through the VSys page and representatives that you're dealing with every day. If you want any follow-up questions or conversations specifically with Karina, with John, with Todd, with myself on any of these topics. And our last minute together, thank you all so much for taking the time, and we value your feedback as much as anything else. We want to be here to serve your needs, and we take advantage of our time as a benefit, as the VSys Voices are here for you going forward.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everybody.
Have a great rest of the week.
Bye.